Okay, I call this meeting of the WES Advisory Committee to order. Chris, do we do roll call? Is that what we do?
Yeah, I can get roll call going. Rita Baker,
Present.
Christina Brow,
Brow here.
Counselor Brake,
Here.
Richard Craven. Not yet. Greg DiLoretto,
Here.
Anthony
Sit here.
Fields.
I'm here.
Are you sure you want me sitting next to you?
Absolutely, you can be the rose between two thorns.
William Gifford,
Here.
Counselor Golaby. Don't see him yet. And let's see, Renee Harbor. Don't see her either. Roseanne Johnson. See you.
Yeah, I'm here. I'll be in person there in about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Safe travels. Sounds good. Counselor Khosrabadi. Don't see him yet. And Preston Course. Don't see him yet either. Mayor McGriff.
Present.
Mayor Milch.
Here.
Michael Morrow.
Here.
And Neil Schulman, but I don't see Neil yet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. And I know tonight, Captain Miller, Brian Johnson, and Christopher Balkan are not with us. They wrote in. Excuse absent.
Whoa. They asked me to use, we should correct the minutes. Because that sounded like there was something sneaky or shaky going on. Are you sure?
I'm gonna turn it over to Greg now and give us some updates.
Thanks, Greg. A few things. I hope, I was thinking of what I wanted to update you guys on, and I hope, I send out the regular WES updates every couple weeks. I hope that you find that useful. I try to keep it all up to date. But there are a couple things. Some of you were at the Clackamole event that we had. We were just talking about it, made paper, and we got lots of good media on it. It was a lot of fun, a lot of work for our staff. But it was very successful. We have a video on our website now, if you haven't seen that. And we have a blog on our website that is tracking the progress of the machine. I'm sure Jeff will talk more about that, but overall, it was a great event. Thank you all who came. I just got back from Pacific Northwest Clean Water Association conference in Boise. The only thing I want to mention that is we do pilot projects around here on a fairly regular basis. And right now we're piloting, we're at the tail end of a pilot study looking at adding a chemical ferric chloride to our treatment stream in order to reduce a nuisance problem called struvite, which is a mineral that under the right conditions and saturations forms, plugs our pipes. And so it takes a lot of time, maintenance, it's a pain. Anyway, so through the pilot project, Jeff and our engineering team are talking to people at Boise, as you do, and as you're networking and Clean Water Services, and I think Portland too, we verified, are also adding ferric to their digesters. And what that does, we have these shiny new digesters, we've got a beautiful new engine, and we have a gas scrubbing apparatus, because the new engine needs clean gas. So we take the biogas, run it through a scrubber, and we found that is as much or more maintenance as we thought it would be. And it's expensive and it's time consuming. So adding the ferric, what Clean Water Services in Portland are doing is adding the ferric to the digester, and for chemistry reasons, it prolongs the life of those filters. So the point being is we go to these conferences because we try to bring back good ideas. The other thing I wanted to kind of toot a horn about is I've talked in the past about one of the biggest risks or challenges for us was actually delivering a very aggressive capital improvement plan. And I'm pleased to say, and for a long time, we had real trouble hiring engineers. But our engineering staff now under Jeff is completely staffed up. And we're nearly 100%. Is it the operations supervisor position? We put a position on the streets for the operations supervisor for this facility. If we get that person, then the other positions that we have already in the pipeline for hiring, we will be 100% staffed for the first time, probably in history. So that's a good thing. Yeah, exactly. I know Alexa had something that she wanted to say as well.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's good to see you tonight. 2 years ago, we surveyed committee members to get feedback on how we're doing and what we can improve on within the WES Advisory Committee. And so after we did this series of interviews last time, we ended up implementing the Lunch and Learn series. We also implemented hybrid meetings like what we're doing tonight. And now's a good time, now that it's been a couple years, for us to check in and continue that feedback loop with you. So this will look like 15 to 30-minute interviews and just answer some questions with me. And we can do this over the phone. We can schedule some time on Zoom, or we can even meet for a cup of coffee. And if you're interested in participating, you can send me an email saying, hey, I'd love to talk to you about the WES Advisory Committee. Or I'll be reaching out next week to folks, to the whole advisory committee, asking if people would be interested in participating. So look forward to hearing from me next week, and I look forward to chatting with you more. Back to you, Greg.
Thanks, Alexa. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is our final solve event of the season will be at High Rocks Park across the river on October 3rd. I'm not sure the times, but they generally start at like
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. Okay. So yeah, let's see.
the date?
The 3rd of October. I don't know what day of the week that is.
It's a Thursday.
And we will invite media and maybe get some press on that one too.
The reason why we don't do it on the weekends?
So we do some on the
So,
weekends.
yeah, I know some are,
Yeah.
this one isn't.
No, and we solve schedules the events, and they try to get a mix of work. Because a lot of the, if you don't know, a lot of the solve volunteers for some of these events are employees from corporations
Corporates,
that give them
yeah.
time
Yeah.
to do community work like that. And so they like to have it on weekdays. So,
But they don't want to give up their weekends.
yeah. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Any questions for Greg? Edie, all right. We'll go to the July minutes. Were there any corrections to the July minutes?
I move they be approved as submitted.
We actually don't do that, but. Second then, somebody put a motion on the floor. We'll second. Second. All right, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Well, then, we go to public comment. Don't have anything, do you, Chris?
I don't have anybody online for public comment, and I don't know if there's anyone there in person, but if not, then
Nope, just a board member.
alrighty.
Okay, then we will turn the floor over to Jeff. Tony, do you have your hand up? No.
Oh, okay.
I think it's part of this mouse.
Yeah.
Oh. Whenever you're looking for the hand.
It's this mouse. I saw that too. and Good call. I'll turn it over to Jeff then. He's going to give us the update on our capital improvement plan. Jeff, it's all yours.
Perfect. Guess I'll share our presentation. Thanks everybody for giving me the time to kind of talk through the CIP we sent out a few weeks ago. Greg had some comments. I think we shared his questions, comments, and kind of our responses to those comments. And so if anybody else has any, bring them forward tonight or send them via email, have a conversation. Be happy to answer any questions or comments on it. But we're going to talk about our capital plan that starts in July of next year. The nice thing about that, if you recall, previously we were kind of looking in arrears on our CIP planning, and now we're looking forward. And so this will really feed into the budget cycle, which is also something that this committee weighs in on. And so it's nice to have kind of two touch points on what we're going to be spending in the next 5 years, but also what's coming for next year. Next slide. We'll give a little background. A lot of the slides are going to be slides you've all seen before. I just kind of sometimes like to beat a horse to death so that we make sure we're all having the same thoughts. We'll talk about the structure, the work we have planned, and then I'll turn it over to Erin and she'll talk about the financial planning and the impact on our rates.
How many of you try to dispose of it in the wastewater system?
Next slide, Chris. As I mentioned, when I gave kind of the updates, we have our 4 major plans, the budget, our strategic plan, our financial plan, and the CIP. And I, of course, like to think of my CIP as the most important plan. Is really the four plans are all, it's really the four plans are all working together. And I think that's what makes each plan kind of stand as a leg to the overall WES approach to how we're delivering our projects and what we need to do. Kind of each one is really equal in that footing. So this is the update. We'll do this update annually on our CIP. And this is the update on that. Next slide. So we're, in addition to the core plans, the CIP is propped up by the master plan and facility plans for all of our different facilities. I'll note that the Hoodland master plan, we're going to kick off a facility planning effort starting next year to look a little bit more at the treatment plant and what might be going on there. And the boring facility plan that was completed in 2020, this was one of those, you start down a pathway and realize the planning document indicated it would be much cheaper to do that than what in reality it was going to cost. And so we had to pull back and reopen the evaluation on what we really need to do with boring. We got some grant money, and so we're using that money to help us identify what we should be doing. So we're working on that and should have an update to that boring facility plan by the end of the year here. So that'll be the latest and greatest on that.
And Jeff, just on the boring, so we initially thought we would put in a pump station and pump it to 172nd area, and we had some engineers' estimates for that turned out to be, once we did the math or figured out what the pumps and the size of the pipe and the loss was, it was astronomically expensive. So we need to take that. And in the meantime, there's a new regulation around temperature that's going to apply to boring that puts a further squeeze on us. So we really need to take a hard look at what we're going to do there.
Next slide. So with our capital plan, we address both capacity, so needs of supporting growth in the community, but also, our systems are aging, and if we don't take care of them, they're going to fall apart. And so when things are all built in the mid-80s, a lot of it, there's a lot of reliability that we have to now continue to maintain and address and replace as things become obsolete or at the end of their life. So the capital plan really, the two main parts are capacity and reliability. There is a regulatory component to it. That's really sometimes hard to put a dollar to because you don't know what the unknowns are. So the regulatory piece, while it might seem small, it could change based on, as Greg mentioned, we get a different temperature regulation at boring or some change to the Willamette TMDLs that we haven't accounted for. That's why it's such a small piece, but it should have a big impact. Total mass daily loading.
Maximum
So
Maximum daily loading,
it's a
sorry.
federal Clean Water Act program administered by the state, and they evaluate water bodies for whether they meet water quality standards or not. If they don't, then they do an exercise where they they figure out what the maximum daily load is that it can still meet water quality standards, and then they regulate according to that. And so, someday, hopefully not soon, the Willamette River will have a TMDL for nutrients. Right now it doesn't, but when it does, that will roll into all the permits that in the Willamette, and in all likelihood, facilities like ours will have to treat for nutrients.
And how often are those reviewed?
Every 2 years.
What's that?
Well, states are required to assess the quality of the surface waters on a 2-year basis, right? To update their TMD or their 303 ELS.
Well, it might be, I know they do the triennial review that's every 3 year, that's water quality standards. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, what do they call it? It's every 2 years.
But it isn't just set it and forget it.
No. I had a question about the temperature and boring. Is it a temperature TMDL that's pushing it?
Yes.
Part of the Willamette subbasins?
Yes.
Yeah.
We actually got we have more load, so a less stringent requirement for this facility and for Kellogg. We won't have temperature problems here or at Kellogg.
The main stem TMDL doesn't. I thought 2025 is when they're working on the main stem TMDL.
It's done now and will go to the Environmental Quality Commission pretty soon.
Yeah.
But the sub-basin TLEL.
That's already
is done.
And temperature has to do with protecting fish, is that?
for what Greg said, I think we're fortunate that we go to the Willamette River. Our friends in Washington County go to the Tualatin River and they have much stricter treatment requirements than we do. And BES goes to Columbia, which is even looser than what we have in the Willamette. So the water body definitely makes an impact on kind of what you need to treat to, for sure. Next slide. So not a huge change from last year to this year in terms of what we're spending reliability to capacity versus regulatory. You can see as much of our plan is about making sure that we continue to maintain and have our existing facility to operate as it is about capacity. Next slide. And then this slide's been up there and I'll create a new one next year with a different message maybe, but this is really to say that we, our baked in assumption in our flows is that we're not letting I&I get worse. We're actually helping I&I in the 19 basins that are the worst in our service area. That's not just West's service area, but that's Westland, Gladstone, Oregon City, collectively as a regional collection system.
I understand you've already seen a reduction just in the little bit that Oregon City's done.
There is, yep, that shows, and we've done some stuff on Mount Talbert as well. And so one of the things, I guess, to Member Griff's point, we're as part of our I&I grant program, our I&I reimbursement program, we're getting information as we deliver projects. Then the cities are giving information back as to how successful those projects are and how we're tracking in those basins, so that we can make sure that we're funding the right projects and we're getting the right return on our investments.
So when you mentioned maybe next year I might have a different message, what do you?
I don't know if a different message, but I've a different slide with maybe showing some of the results that we've seen on how we're tracking over the last 3 years. We've been really targeting our efforts on it. So I'm hoping to have some information on where we're at versus where we thought we might be without any I&I.
I think that would be helpful, because I think the more we can show the public and the other electeds that this is something that is valuable, I think that it just serves the purpose of showing this is what we can do to reduce and, be more conservative.
Absolutely. I won't say the hard part, but it takes a whole wet weather cycle. You do these projects and then you have to really have a whole other wet weather season to collect the flow monitoring data to see how successful or the water has a tendency to find the path of least resistance. So we're working in here, but then that groundwater might shift up a little bit. And now we realize, oh, you know what? We've got problems over here now that we didn't have before because we're sealing up places where it used to go. And so we're definitely having an impact. It's going to take some time to really demonstrate large impacts because
Not as linear.
it's not a linear, exactly. It's not.
I thought about that yesterday when I was sitting at City Hall on the bench waiting for the 15-minute rain dump to stop so that we could actually walk in the parking lot without getting swept away. And I thought, well, hopefully that I&I is working.
So what would you estimate though, right now? I know it's only been two monitoring and evaluations.
Yeah, so we just this summer is really some of the early projects that are getting built. We had some last summer. I have a slide in Mount Talbert for our stuff that I can show later that'll show kind of how we've changed the curve on what was projected in the master plan. And we're definitely having an impact. I don't have we look at it as like gallons per acre, and so I don't have off the top of my head what that number is, but I'll show you on a later slide. We can talk about that. Next slide. So the summary of the major changes, just to kind of highlight the bigger things that are changed here. We went through and updated all of our project cost estimates to the engineering news record construction cost index of July of 2024. And so that's for projects that we haven't gotten any design details done or any kind of a new estimate from an engineer as we work through progression of design. Any of those projects just got an engineering news record index applied to them. Where we got new estimates, those new estimates were included in the plan. Based on some of the changes in costs, we adjusted the timing for the upper and lower Clackamas Interceptor, and it's also based on some of the flow monitoring we're seeing. It's not coming up in those basins as quick as we thought, so we're adjusting the timing of those. We had planned to deliver the Willamette Pump Station and Force Main, kind of building it and both concurrently, and we've separated them out to build one after the other now instead of building them all at the same time. The Tri-City Influent Pump Station project costs went up significantly. That was really driven by electrical needs that were found. When we went in and started sizing pumps, we found that electrical wasn't captured very well or very clearly in the facility plan. You know, they used a kind of a percentage-based approach where this is almost as much an electrical project as it is a pump project, just because the electrical drivers are significant in there. We created a new project detail sheet layout. In that layout, you'll see we're trying to really be more transparent and track costs a little bit better, so you can see year over year kind of how we're accounting for changes in our project costs and kind of providing that information in there, so it's clear if we had a project go up $5 million, why did it go up $5 million? Just so we can capture and so people can be aware of why some of those changes are occurring. It's not just that we're adding a bunch of scope or things of that nature. And then in doing the plan, I found that I double counted last year on the digester project at Kellogg. So we have a markup we apply on construction costs. It's called ELA, engineering, legal, and administrative. So it's basically kind of how much we're paying our consultants, how much we have in legal fees or, you know, things of that nature, and then how much it costs us as our time to deliver the project. And so I had applied a markup on that project that was already applied in the cost estimate. So that project came down in cost only because it was double counted before. And those are the major changes. There's also a lot of small little changes in there, but those are the big ones that highlight the biggest. Next slide. So these are our updated 5-year capital spends over the next 5 years. And so just to kind of highlight some of the changes in our last CIP that we adopted in 25-26, we had $57 million planned to spend. In 26-27, we had $43 million to spend. So you can see some of those costs have shifted a little bit. And then in 27-28, we had $31 million planned. And in 28-29, we had $31 million to spend. So you can see costs have come up on a number of different projects, and then the inflationary costs as well have driven some of these cost changes. And this is one where I complain about fiscal year being ending in June because it's right in the middle of our construction season where we're really spending the most of our money. And so a small delay in a project can really impact fiscal year spending, not project spending, but fiscal year spending. An example of that is the Outfall project. We had about an $8 million shift in spending on the Outfall project this year from one fiscal year to the next. So
That was a delay of the
Budgeting.
yeah.
And just to give, this is an astronomical number. What's our burn rate going to be for the months ahead?
So last month was 7.5 million. This month was around 6 million. And then we have the next 2 months are going to be about 8.5 to $9 million a month. So a lot of spend.
Jeff, the report is really good in giving details on the spending, but it talks about the revenue sources, system development charges to accommodate growth and capacity, I'm sure. But the question I get at the city level a lot of times is, you know, how much of our rates that the ratepayers are paying are going into this? Can you kind of give us a breakdown of the revenue sources for a capital improvement project? Because you have such a steady, uniform, very moderate increase in rates for much of the services that you provide. It's not, and cities sometimes when we try to do infrastructure, we have to do a major increase in rates because maybe we haven't, you know, had a good rate of growth in the past. So how would you break that down?
We do have a slide that gets into it a little
will,
later,
okay.
yeah, but
Great.
that's a great question.
I'll wait for that, and that's fine. Thank you.
Real quick, Greg had a question about I&I, and we do, Chris confirmed that we do have a topical meeting, kind of a summary meeting here in July of next year.
Given all the questions that you had around I&I, it seems like we need a separate meeting would be.
Yeah, well, and then we'll be able to show performance and things by it, but we will dedicate a meeting to I&I, or at least part of it, probably most of it.
Absolutely. Next slide will be the stormwater. So you can see the stormwater, we have a really big spend coming next year, and that's on the Three Creeks project. And then The remaining years really are doing the projects that were identified in our stormwater master plan. But the big one there that you see the significantly higher is the Three Creeks project. And the 5-year total on the stormwater side is $24.3 million. Next slide. So here's as I talked about I&I, well, I do want to highlight that, as I mentioned, the strategic plan, and you'll see some of the slides, and I missed this one particularly, is also, we have a strategic plan goal in there on delivering the Mount Talbot I&I reduction project. And so and that was supposed to be delivered by 2026. I'm happy to say we've delivered that project. We still have some realignment to do, but the major work in the I&I has been done. And so I'll comment just on the graph. So the dark blue line was kind of what our master plan estimated we would have in terms of the bottom is 24-hour rainfall in inches, and then the blue line, the y-axis is peak flow, so how much is coming through this basin. And so the blue line is what it predicted master plan we would be now, and that dashed blue line after our work that we did in there is where we're at today with it. So we're not completely there yet, but we've made a really big dent in a very short period of time with a very small amount of investment, much smaller than we expected to have to spend there. And this is one of those where, you do the smoke testing, and you do these other ways to look at where is this water coming from. Sometimes you can find downspouts that are directly connected or things of that nature. We found smoke coming out of a stormwater basin. I mentioned this at the last meeting, and we plugged that pipe, and that had a massive impact on the inflow that we were seeing in that basin. It was draining a huge area down to the storm basin that was literally just coming. We were basically funneling that whole basin right into our sewer. And so I hope to have more graphs like this to show kind of in these basins how we're trending and tracking over years. But that's a pretty big win for us.
This is one basin.
This is one of the basins, yeah.
Is the starting point anticipated to go below 2, towards 2 on the y-axis? Or was that kind of like is that the?
That's kind of the base, that's the base flow. We expect that's the customer flow.
Yeah, you
through
see
that
that
system.
no matter what.
Yep,
Okay.
that's kind of people's houses, that's what the expected sanitary flows we would see in
That's
that
just
basin.
normal stormwater. That's not any I&I at
That's
all.
correct. That's if we had no I&I and we were just looking at the dwelling units we had connected to our sewer, that's we would see about 2 in that little over 2 in that basin, 2.5, 3.
And it's accounting for all stormwater, right? So like residential, commercial, industrial.
All of the sewer, yeah, any sanitary sewer connection to us, yeah. So for that Mount Talbot basin, which is, outlined in this blue line, it's a big basin. So we break our basins are broken up based on geometry, relief in the land, right? And so that's what would normally drain to this point. And so we have flow meters. We'll disperse flow meters throughout the system to try to help identify where is the higher I&I coming from, so that then we can target.
So he's talking about sanitary sewer.
I
So the
know.
2.2, okay.
Yeah.
Not storm sewer.
Yeah, in a
Well,
perfect,
that's the flow of sanitary, but then it
Right, and
goes
stuff
up, we
above-
get I&I in it.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's, I want to make sure that the 2 point whatever, like the 2.5, that starting point for the dot is no I&I.
Right, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what we just said. This-
Right, and so the goal is to get that hash line down
Closer.
lateral.
Correct. And so for a basin of this size, what would be kind of industry standards on what you're never gonna seal the system up to be.
Correct.
You're always gonna have some I&I.
Yep.
And so a 4, so they've got the flow target rate of 8.7 MGD and a 2020 in 2040 under I believe it's a 2-inch rainfall event. So we're under it now today, but we've got 16 more years of degradation on our system out there, so to speak, right? I mean, you put it in the ground, it's as tight as it's ever gonna be, and over time, it continues to kind of let water in. So we're under where we need to be in 2040, but if we look at what we think where we'll be in 2040, we would still slightly exceed it, but we're really close to meeting what we would expect.
Jeff, interesting to see the flow. Is there any way of tracking a dollar ROI? I know we sold this to our customers
Right.
based on the idea that it was going to save money in the long run.
Yeah.
Have we saved any money?
I'd say it's That is a good question, William. I think we need a little bit more information on over a number of years, what investments we've made to track how much impact we've had to make sure that that still holds true.
I'll rephrase the question.
I was,
How many years do you think it would take before we can look back and say, hey, this is how much money we've saved?
I think we need to do, I would say we had set up the pilot for 5 years, was the initial plan to do this for 5 years. I'd say that's a good time for enough projects to be designed, built, and then data captured on the tail end. So it's a 5-year pilot is what we have set up. We have plans to continue it, but the original kind of IGAs were 5-year run. And I would say at the end of 5 years, we'll have a much better feel for how that's tracking.
But it looks good.
If we continue to see wins like this, it's looking really good. Like I said, it's a challenging target because the target moves, you fix here, now water comes, you shift the underlying conditions, but we're looking good so far.
And I understand the ROI is really just a cost avoidance type of thing.
Yep.
We aren't gonna make any money on this.
Right.
But hopefully we can reduce our costs.
And I think long-term, this, I guess just to paint the picture, it's not just what we have to build at the treatment plant that this impacts, right? It's all of the piping that connects to the treatment plant. So it's not just, well, we would need this capacity. It's all of the other piping that we would potentially have to upsize and other things like that. So it's all through the collection system as well. And so this kind of meeting this goal is important for us as an organization and for us as a region for those reasons as well. It's not just build another thing at the treatment plant. If it doesn't work, we'd have to go back and reevaluate sizing on some of our pipelines in the network.
Go
ahead.
One of the other things you said, I think that's helpful too, is to understand that this is not one of those things that sort of follows an 80-20 rule where 80% of your I&I comes to 20% of your damaged situations. Right. And that if you fix those first, that's your low-hanging fruit that really takes care of most of it. Like you say, the water will always seek that next level, and you may think you're treating the most impactful area, but find that it doesn't have the impact you want. So that's why getting more data over a longer season is really the only, accurate way to measure the results.
And we've grown our flow metering network in our system too. So we have, 10 years ago, we had less meters out there. Now we have more meters to really kind of track and trend what's going on in our collection system so we can see that impacts. And we're updating our hydraulic model every other year as well. So we can really, to your point, start to understand how much of an impact are we having, because if you're not really updating the model to see how it's impacting all the downstream pipe networks and stuff outside of these 19 basins, it's kind of a snowball effect, so to speak. And so it's I hope to be able to share more positive information as it comes in from our projects and our member city projects.
I'm very impressed with what we're doing regarding I&I. And are we being used as a model to other districts?
I don't know. Maybe that should be a conference topic that maybe I could do, or we could do it together, because it's both. I mean, the model that we have, the collaborative, there's a million ways that other organizations around the country are doing. Some just say if you have a peak flow above something, we're going to charge you more. There's just a million ways, and there's several white papers that people have put together. I've never seen this model, but we have a unique situation where we have multiple cities, and so it's a very collaborative one, and I do think that it's something that we should tell people about.
Yeah, with the grants and like the incentives.
Yeah.
Clean Water does something similar. We're targeting our 19 worst basins. They have some basins that they look at as well and are helping their member cities as well. They're structured a little different, but we're not the only ones doing it, but we're definitely, I would say, it's not to your point, it's more a model that we could be out to demonstrate to other folks how we're doing now, how successful it is.
Mm-hmm. You better move on with
Sorry.
I actually had one more question, and then William kept going. So
There you go.
one of the things that would be helpful on a map like that is that you've got all the brown squiggly lines, which are basically where the connections are. So I don't know how you would do it, but it would be great if they were highlighted somehow where it's been done.
Sure.
So you could kind of see what the overall effect is, because your graph is great, but visually is like, okay, well, is it here? Is it there? Where is it?
Sure, we'll
In
kind of
terms-
highlight where the projects were completed
Yeah.
within that basin, absolutely.
That might be a really great visual for people who are not, you know, familiar with it, and they go, oh, that's much been done. Oh, okay, I get that.
Yeah, I like that, I like that suggestion. I will go faster. That's a great conversation. I is something that really touches all of our communities, so, next slide. The Outfall project, so this was another one that fell in our strategic plan, and so the strategic plan was to have the Outfall design completed by 2025. We're under construction, so we've definitely met that. And the Outfall to be in operation in 2026, and right now we're tracking to have it be brought online right at the beginning of 2026, if not in 2025, depending on how the diffuser work goes next summer. But the tunnel was launched on the 29th of August. And we're anticipating arriving in the river in late November. Open cut trench construction started on the 5th. And they're also expecting that to be done in November, which is why when we talk about how much we're going to be spending this summer, it's a lot, because we have basically 2 construction crews out there working at the same time on a very big project.
A lot of pipes piled out there.
It's a lot of pipe.
Somebody told me the other day that they thought that that bridge looked more like the Fremont Bridge than it did our bridge. And I said, yeah, it doesn't really totally look like the bridge.
Yeah. It's it evokes.
Yeah, it's supposed to be solid on, if it was solid on the top, I think it would have been more. I said, yeah, I didn't do that. That was a different project.
But thanks everybody that was able to make it out to that event. It was a lot of fun. Next project, or next slide. So the wet weather expansion, and so this is really about treating wet weather. The facility plan identified this project. We've updated the cost for inflationary reasons. And it's really to increase the peak capacity from 70 million gallons at our plant now to 105, and that's hydraulic capacity that we can send through our plant. We're working with DEQ right now to get their nod of agreement that our recommended plan to build this wet weather treatment system is acceptable to them, and that was submitted in January of 2023. So we're having continuing conversations with them on that. And we're planning to start design in 2026 with the system to be available and online in 2031.
With the increased flows, do you anticipate that having any impact on like your effluent limits in the permit and water quality based ones? It's probably gonna change your dilutions and.
I think it'll change our mass load. It's more so we look at, when we looked at our outfall in the diffuser design, right? It was designed through 2080 flows, and so the outfall will be able to handle the dispersion for current water quality standards. Did you have your hand?
To update that second paragraph on the left hand side.
We're out there, that whole thing.
Yeah. Did
You
you
want to add something, Ron?
Ron?
Yeah, just to get back to William's question a little bit, and then just more of a question for Jeff, the capacity that we're designing to for the wet weather expansion assumes reduction in I&I, right?
Yeah.
The answer is no, then I withdraw my question.
No, yes.
So as soon as we build that project to a smaller capacity than we would have if we weren't assuming a reduction in I&I, we save money. Because otherwise we would do this wet weather expansion project would be much larger.
When we looked at that, there's step costs for treatment plant. It's really expensive to build 10 million gallons of plant because it's a big chunk. It's hard to build it in a linear, like, oh, we need a couple more million here. You got to build it all at one time. It's a big chunk. And so it's really big jumps in cost. As you can see, we're expecting this 35 million to cost about $60 million. And so it's every million we can take out is a big chunk of money we can save.
And you're not gonna use that capacity as soon as it's done, it's.
Correct. Yeah, that would take us through.
Last over a long.
That would take us to 2040, so we'd have 10 years before we would even see that, and that's a peaking factor, and so if we can beat our I&I projections, then that would delay the next project.
And just to drive the point home for Mayor Altscher, that saves the ratepayers, your existing residents and your future residents that buy new homes or establish new businesses. Because then they're not paying increased SDCs that would have to be built into the capital improvement plan to fund it on the new development side, and your ratepayers are saying saving on the existing funding side. So.
And the next slide. Again, that Clackamas Interceptor is a strategic plan initiative, and you know, our plan was to have the middle interceptor segment designed by 2026. This is 3 projects being all designed at one time to 60%, and then we'll focus the middle to get that one built first. That's where the constraint lies today with the flow. It's under design, and we expect that to meet that goal currently. Next slide. The Intertie 2 pump station and force main, another strategic plan initiative, and this was to complete the design in by 2025. We're getting ready to kick off construction on the force main portion, and we'll be out to bid on the pump station by the end of the year, and so we've definitely met that goal as well. And I've talked about this one, so I won't go into details unless there's questions, stop me, but I'll just kind of talk about the highlights and why they're there. Next slide. And then the Willamette Interceptor program, that again is, it's kind of 3 projects. It's the project that ODOT's building, our force main, and our pump station. As I mentioned before, we broke this up. Originally, we were going to build the pump station and force main kind of at the same time, and looking at the financial side of it, we're going to put one, and it's unclear. They're both about the force main and pump station cost about the same amount of money, so we'll be working through which one goes first for construction as we continue to work through design, working with operations to determine how much which is needed first. We have capacity in the existing force main to meet today's needs, but that pump station has some pumps that clog and causes issues, and so it might be that we build the pump station first, but use the old force main to start with, and then come back after that and build the force main. I think that's probably where we'll end up, but we'll work together to figure out what makes most sense.
And that's a great example of the kind of the dance that we do to keep that rate profile looking like this instead of doing that. And Aaron and the finance team, Jeff and the engineering team work really hard to sequence things so that we can maintain that.
Yeah, what you see in the plan is 4 times back and forth on shifting projects around and looking at kind of capacities and what's going to drop that. So it's never the first cut, for sure. Next slide. And then the Bolton force main, and this is one that is, this is the smart pig that we did. This is where we've had 3 breaks now since I've been here in this force main. It goes through Maddox Park. The smart pig we launched this summer to collect information to understand, like, all right, we've had these breaks. What is the condition of this force main? And so we found that there's some things that they recommend us go do physical evaluation on. So we're going to be out there probably soon, digging holes in a few locations to see what's going on in the pipe. This smart pig is a really fascinating thing. It sends out, it looks at the interior surface and looks for anomalies in the interior surface. And so there was a number of places where they said, hey, we find an anomaly here and there's no fitting that we expected to be here. So you guys might want to go take a look at that location. And so
they can tell exactly where on the pipe and at what location. I mean, the report from that is really amazing. And that was one of the things that kept me up at night, was not knowing the condition of that thing underneath the river. And it did come back with, I think, 6 areas that we will now go investigate, which gives me great comfort knowing that we're at least being proactive now and not waiting for things to break.
Because inevitably they break at the wrong time.
They always do.
The PIG doesn't stand for anything, does it?
No,
Or does it just the fact that the engineers say it looks like a pig?
Actually, it was the noise it made as it came through the
Oh,
pipe.
oh,
It sounded like a pig.
I see.
And so they got termed pig. Yeah. So we put this project in as we've estimated it based on if we had to do a replacement, or so we've taken a guess at what that cost would be. We're kicking into alternatives analysis once we do some of this investigation work, and we'll have better information to share next year on exactly what needs to be done at this pipe to make sure that we have a pipe that's going to be with us for a long time. It's a critical piece of infrastructure as it brings flow across the river, basically from Westland, from that side of Westland. Next slide. And then our ongoing programs, and this is another way that we keep from having to have these big jumps as we maintain our infrastructure. So we continue to replace obsolete equipment. This could be PLCs in the plant or control pieces, could be pipes, pumps, all of that kind of stuff. And so we have $3.2 million a year in our capital budget where we're going through and doing, whether it's out in the collection system lining our pipes. Or replacing infrastructure from that place around the plant. It's a pretty successful, we've really cleaned up our asset management, and so we're really out ahead of things. When I first started here 8 years ago, it would seem like every couple of weeks we had some emergency fire drill of, having to swing through and replace a pump that's failed or something like that. And now we've got it to where we're really doing our regular PMs, and we can really anticipate when those needs are, and we can program them into these ongoing costs where it's just a pump swap out and not a pump swap out and a whole bunch of other stuff that failed because the pump failed and caused a bunch of damage. So really, really happy with the condition of our asset program right now. And then next slide. And then from stormwater, I mentioned the really big spend on stormwater is this Three Creeks natural area. And there's been a lot of changes based on some of the grant funding we were able to get and then maybe not able to get. But we still anticipate construction to start next summer in 2025. And right now we've got 90% plans, so we're in the process of reviewing those plans, and the next step would be to go out to bid for the project. Super exciting, and we've done a tour out there, and I'm sure as we get into construction or finish design, if there's this group wants to learn more about the details of that project and what ended up in the final design, we'd be happy to share that as well. And the next slide. So this is just a slide I like to present so we can so I can show you just how drastic the 21, the inflationary costs were to construction and how they're starting to see things level out, which is really great for us and our opportunities to kind of predict what costs are going to be. Aaron will talk a little bit about some changes we made there in terms of how we were forecasting, but things have leveled out. As a matter of fact, on IT2, when we bid that project, it actually came in under budget of what the engineer's estimate was. So I hope some more of our projects come in under budget, which is always really beneficial to us. And the next slide. And then in the project detail sheets, you'll see I tried to list the level of estimate we have for each project and where it's at. And really, I want to highlight when we get our planning level documents, they're really undefined projects. They're not in there to the IPS as a prime example. Once we got into design and picked the exact pumps, it's like, oh, we have much bigger electrical needs to drive this system. Now we're replacing all the MCCs and other things, and it really grew in scope, but it wasn't found in the planning level estimates or the planning level that they did. And so, that is a plus or minus, plus 100, minus 50 at the planning level. And so when we get those, we're basing our planning document, our capital plan on those numbers, but it is a challenge we face in our industry holistically across all organizations. But as we continue to know more, that window narrows in and we get better costs. And that's why I really wanted to include that kind of information in our project detail sheets, just to provide some clarity on kind of how things are changing and how they've changed over time. And it is a living document essentially, because we're always learning new information. And then next slide. And I'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right, so financial and capital planning are in our integrated processes, and once Jeff's team gives his project estimates over to us, we input that into our financial model to determine the financing sources for the projects and project the resulting rates. So these first two slides will be a quick refresher for most of you, but we wanted to provide this information as context for some of our newer advisory committee members. And really, this is the long-term financial plan that we worked to develop with the advisory committee on and finalized in March of 2022. And these 5 objectives have been used to guide our annual budgets since that time, as well as the financial aspects of our capital planning. The first 3 are the most relevant to capital planning. Providing all necessary services to protect public health and water quality speaks to first financing all operating and maintenance costs, but also covering the reliability and regulatory aspects of the capital plan to ensure that services are reliably delivered and we're meeting all current requirements. Number 2 is directly related to that capacity piece on that chart that Jeff showed earlier. That speaks to financing all capital improvement projects that support growth as they're needed. And number three, cost-effective service delivery speaks to controlling operating costs, ensuring that we maintain access to low-cost capital through sound financial management, and are setting our rates based on cost of service. Next slide, please. So the specific strategies that we're employing to realize those objectives are outlined on this slide. Our target for annual rate increases is 5%. That target was set with the advisory committee. We are working to limit our annual operating and maintenance cost increases to 5%. That's been somewhat of a challenge over the past 2 years of high inflation, but as we get into on the next slide, we're actually looking to lower that. Allocating, so this year's capital spending is $80 million, and that's the highest that we've seen since we finished the Tri-City Liquids expansion project in 2012. At that time, we had fund reserves of around $48 million, and since then, we've been intentionally building reserves in anticipation of the projects that we're currently funding and will be funding in the proposed CIP. So our peak was reached in 22-23 with $194 million in reserves. We've since spent some of that down on the outfall and are planning to continue to allocate those reserves to capital financing, and that reduces any sort of rate shock that we might have seen in order to finance these projects if we didn't have those reserves built up. So we do have a target to maintain a debt service coverage ratio of 140%, which is higher than the required coverage ratio of 120%. And that's both a strategy to maintain access to low cost capital through higher bond ratings, and it's also a risk management strategy to provide for a buffer against fluctuations in revenue or unexpected costs. We had a pre-meeting with Greg Buloretto, and he brought up a great point about whether the target ratio would ever drive rate increases. Super good question. And in the current financial projections, due to the planned steady rate increases and controlling our operating costs, there's no instance where we're increasing rates just to meet that coverage target. And if there ever were, we would reassess that strategy. We don't want to be increasing rates just to meet a target. So, and then we return to this committee for input.
Karen, what's our bond rating now?
It's AAA, the highest the S&P towards. So system development charge resources are relatively unpredictable revenue as they depend on underlying development activity. So it's often the case where we don't have SDCs on hand to be able to fund SDC eligible projects on a pay-as-you-go basis. And in those cases, we utilize debt financing, and then we realize the SDC eligibility by repaying the debt with SDCs as those come in. That was a strategy that the advisory committee recommended a few years ago, and we've been using to reduce pressure on rates. And it ameliorates some of the issues that we see with the difference in timing between the receipt of SDCs and when we spend those SDCs. And then just the last one on here, every dollar we get in external funding and grants is a dollar we don't have to get in rates for SDCs. So that really helps. Next slide, please. So just like Jeff went over the changes between the current CIP and the proposed CIP, this chart shows the difference between the financial components that we've used in planning for the currently adopted CIP for 24, 25 through 28, 29, and the proposed CIP for the next 5 fiscal years. The 5-year sewer CIP is decreasing because of the high expenditures we have this year on the outfall. The surface water CIP is increasing due to a shift in the timing for the Three Creeks Water Quality Project, as well as some projects commencing in the 5th year of the proposed CIP that weren't included in the current CIP. We are still on target for our 5% rate increases for both sewer and surface water. That's a slight reduction from where we were last year during the capital planning process with the surface water fund. And that's mostly due to a reduced operating budget, lower than our projected increase during the current year, as well as revision in our economic assumptions. So we do regularly review the economic assumptions we use for financial planning. And we took a thorough review this year, and we did a lot of discussion with Jeff's team. The most significant change we made was to the construction cost index. We increased that assumption from 2% to 3%. That's based on a 10-year rolling actual increase for the ENR annual national average. The other changes that we made were to our operating costs. The 5% increase in operating costs is actually much more, it's an overall average of more granular assumptions for different cost categories such as labor, chemicals, utilities. internal and central services and miscellaneous supplies. So we looked, and you may recall from the budget review that looking back at actual year-over-year labor cost increases, we've been around 4% for the last 5 years and 5% for the last 3. We were using 6% for labor cost assumptions. We're keeping that assumption for the next 3 fiscal years, and then we're going to lower that to 5%. Assuming that the CPI will stay between the 2 and 3% range that it currently is, and with PERS projections that we just received. We're also slightly lowering the assumption for the increase in chemical and other supply costs from 4.5% to 4% in the 3rd year out. We're keeping that where it is for now. And then we've brought down the increases for central and internal service costs to the baseline 3% that the county is assuming in their forecast. And so those are the costs that WES pays to the county for the services they provide us. So the net difference is that lowers our annual operating and maintenance cost target to 4.3% in the outer years of the plan. So we are looking to get to more aggressively control our operating costs. And that's one of the ways that we're able to continue to finance this plan, even as costs increase for the capital projects. So there's a net increase from increasing the construction cost index to 3%, raises the total revenue requirements over 10 years by 20 million, decreasing the operating costs assumptions to 4.3% beginning in the 4th year, reduces that by about 8 million. And then we base our SDC increases on our construction cost index. So increased SDC revenue from using 3% instead of 2% offsets another 5 million. So the total change resulting from the shifts in economic assumptions was $7 million more in revenue requirements over the 10-year planning horizon. We had a population growth projection completed in December 2022 by FCS Group, and that projected 1% growth over the next 5 years. Even with the lower development activity this year, we saw a 0.9% increase in our service quantity for sewer. So we feel like 1% is still a pretty good growth rate to use for planning.
Isn't that still some other stuff getting in there that's not strictly?
Yes, good point. Yeah, we are basing our commercial billing quantities on water used. So we're not measuring that based on sewer out. So that wouldn't take into account any I&I or other things getting into the system. It would just be based on what water they use. And then that's oftentimes adjusted for deductions they make for processes if they're a business. But good question.
Aaron,
Yeah.
when do we get our next population estimates?
Probably not for a few years, unless something dramatically changes. If they continue to be pretty accurate, we won't spend the money to get an updated projection until probably 2025.
Oh, so you don't use the
Or
PSU numbers that come out every year?
We haven't been, no, because they aren't granular enough for our service area, like the CCSD1 and Tri-City. Tri-City is more contiguous with cities, but CCSD1 is unincorporated in the boundaries. We kind of have to get a different analysis for accurate projections. I'm sure it was similar for you. And so the increase in surface water capital does bring our debt financing up 1 year. The financing that we need through debt in 26-27 is only about 9 million. So in all likelihood, we could push debt financing off until 27-28. And then we did update our financing assumptions with the current CIP to use a 30-year term from a 25-year term. 3.5% interest is what we're using for planning. That is actually exactly what the bond yield is for a AAA municipality in a 30-year term. This week, it was 3.6% last week. There's other more advantageous financing available through SRF, so 3.5% is pretty conservative, but a good number to use. And then SDC increases continue to be inflationary only, although we do have a plan to update the methodologies based on this CIP once it's adopted. Next slide, please. And Mayor Milch, this is in response to your question, what's the breakdown of how we're going to pay for this? So as you can see, we're primarily funding the capital improvement plan with user charges, and that includes reserves in our construction fund. We'll be ending this year with about $50 million in construction fund reserves and $37 million in SDC fund reserves. And we'll be directing the majority of that at our capital plan for over the next 5 years. The balance will come from debt proceeds. On the surface water side, debt proceeds make up about half of the financing. We don't have as high reserves in our surface water construction fund, so there isn't that buffer to pay for those there. As you can see on the last row on this slide, eligible SDC costs are greater than the available SDC reserves and incoming SDCs. So as we mentioned earlier, we'll be financing those SDC eligible projects with some of our debt proceeds and then repaying that debt with SDCs as we receive that funding in the future. Next slide, please. And so forecasted rates are just exactly the same projections that we shared during the budget process. We're on track to reach wastewater rate parity by 2031, and this just shows 5% per year. We are still well under the average for the area. That's at about $60 right now for sewer and about $13 for surface water. Next slide, please. And then I think you've all seen this slide before, but it's just really financial and capital planning and an iterative process, and adopting the CIP is just the first part. Once the CIP is adopted, it gets incorporated into the annual budget, and then there's a public process to approve the budget. And if at any point the resulting rates, once we get updated forecasts, are too high, we would then revisit the capital budget for changes to project timing or amounts. Back to you.
Yep. So summary and next steps, just our total wastewater CIP for the next 5 years is 216 million and 24.3 for surface water. So we've asked for feedback from you folks to, if you have any questions, Aaron and I would be happy to have a conversation, respond via email, any form of communications acceptable, let us know. I'd like to offer that we're making the same presentation to the technical advisory team. So that's the kind of engineering groups from all of our member cities. They got a copy of the 5-year CIP, and we will be giving this presentation to them at our quarterly meeting next week, and soliciting feedback from them as well. And so our next meeting would be incorporating any updates or questions, concerns, comments from you, and asking for a motion of support at our next meeting. I don't think we have a firmed date for that yet, so more to come on that. And then if our support is received, then we would be presenting this to the board for adoption. So.
And the next meeting where we would vote is in November. Is that
Well,
right?
we're gonna have to
We have to talk about that.
because we have an issue.
Okay, yeah, I was just like thinking about how that's kind of coming together
Right,
closely.
yeah, we'll
Yeah.
talk about that.
And
So, yeah.
that's it for us.
Okay, well, we ran over, but I think this is important stuff. I didn't do a very good job of managing the meeting. So what we need to do now, unless there's some burning questions right this moment, you go back, take a look at it, read the stuff, have questions, send them to Jeff. And I think they'll copy it, so the rest of us get it like when I ask the questions. And then when we come back together next week, can hopefully vote on. Couple of things. One, I've was notified that 4 people's terms are expiring. Renee Harper, Matt Miller, Roseanne Johnson, and my own. Come the available late fall, the application process will open up, and so
Right.
they name back into that. That's what you want. Yes, the November meeting becomes an issue because both Denise and I are out of the country. I don't think we're going to the same spot. That'd be wild.
We're just keeping that down the down low. That's not where we're going.
Yeah. So we don't have, so we're looking at sometime in October to have our next meeting, which is fine. And this will be the topic of conversation at that meeting. We'll get around to everybody, or Chris will get around to everybody.
And there's a big event downtown on the 10th from 6 to 8.
You're downtown,
Our downtown.
so that might not work.
It involves eating and drinking.
That might work.
So maybe you should come to the meeting down there.
Okay, is there anything else this evening? We got a tour if you want.
I actually have if you don't mind, I have actually a question, and it's mostly for you. So I understand that unless you already talked about it, the OCBA, Oregon City Business Alliance, is trying to put together some sort of a panel.
Yeah.
And so what's the story about that?
Yes, so so we are a member of the Organized Business Alliance, and every year we sponsor a water related topic to be discussed. And we're organized this year, it's October 25th. And we've got Todd Heidgerken from Clackamas River Water.
So what's the topic?
That's October 22nd.
22nd, okay.
I know it's water related, I knew that, but I said,
What's the title, Ron?
It's sort of it's still about Clackamas County's clean water future, but we've talked about source water, watershed health, climate. We've talked about wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, emerging contaminants, and we want to sort of close the loop with a conversation around drinking water, because we haven't had a conversation about the community's drinking water systems and how vital that is to sort of the one water vision. And so we're inviting drinking water providers to speak.
And they'll be focusing on kind of the future.
right, and that's where the question came to me. I said, why are you asking me? Well, I'm the vice chair of South Fork Water Board, so that's probably why.
I did invite Wyatt, but he couldn't make it.
He, yeah, we were talking about that. That was the thing that I was interested in. So.
And the
you
event
have
is on
conversation
Tuesday.
offline.
Oh, sorry. The event is on Tuesday, October 15th from 11:30 to 1.
Thank you, Alexa, for
You're
clearing that
welcome.
up.
You have the 22nd?
Yes.
They're doing it on the third Tuesday
Tuesday.
in October because there was a conflict at the Abernathy Center for the last
Oh, that
Tuesday of the
makes
month.
sense.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was the last Tuesday.
No, it's the fourth Tuesday of the month.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just for this one.
This one, okay.
Hey, I got a quick question. I've asked this before and I'm sorry, I don't remember the answer. With the legislature pushing cottage clusters, do you think that if all of a sudden that happens, is that going to stress the system?
Like the change in density, like.
Yeah.
So would. So it might impact how we have to operate our facilities,
Yay.
but in the dry months, we take half our plant offline from a loading perspective, and so I would say densification is not going to impact us, because it's not gonna add that much. So like where we get our I&I is where we have to build out big collection system, so extra length of pipe, and so those types of things where we're tightly packing people is less of an impact to us on our peak flows in our facility, and our facility from a loading perspective is. We have plenty of capacity that way. It's really the hydraulic capacity, and those things wouldn't add a lot of hydraulic capacity to our hydraulic drivers to our plant.
And it increases our income from rates.
There you go.
I remember I asked Lynn looked at that specifically for Milwaukee. Because, we're constrained there and we're not gonna expand that facility, and the same answer. Oh, and also, this is Ryan Miller. He's new to the county. He's with the county's overall HR department, and he's our labor relations liaison, business partner. And he's just getting to know Wes, so thanks for coming.
I was gonna say, we didn't do anything.
Yeah. No one's.
Well, I wasn't admitting to that.
I want to add, you may have all that program for October already planned, but one of the things that I got out of this capital improvement plan is, you think capital improvement, you think pumps, pipes, all the big heavy metal stuff. And you got the tech nerds that love that. But the surface water projects that get in and preserve, the habitats and make places beautiful and improve, the things you could walk past. And yeah, it's, I think if you could emphasize that to the community, that's really something that just appeals to so many people. This is a state and a region where you have people that really care about all of those things that improve the environment in that way. And if they think of a water service, utility entity, whatever you call it, as mainly about pumps and treatment, they're missing out on some of the most exciting stuff.
Agreed.
We care about all water.
Kim Swan from the Clackamas River Water Providers, who works with all the different water providers. She's on the panel as well, and is I think going to speak to the source protection work in the Clackamas River watershed, because Just like when people think about our drinking water systems, they think treatment and pipes and delivery systems. They don't always think about the source water itself. And for most of us, that's the Clackamas River. So I think she's gonna speak to some of those source protection measures at the forum.
Okay, yeah, we're late, so thank you, everyone, we'll, more on the next meeting, which won't. Thanks, everybody.
Well, in November, I will be in Cuba.